afternoon, and Dax, wherever you are, this is going to be a really, really tough gig to follow. But I have faith, and I hope you do as well. It's really a privilege to be speaking to you this afternoon and doing the last speech of today. First of all, just so I can get to know you a little bit better before I tell you a few things about myself and who we are as a company and how we do things as opposed to what we do, because I think that's actually more interesting, how we do things as opposed to what we do. I'd like to know how many people in the room are either a business leader or in a position to make a serious change in a business. Hands up. A business leader or in a position to make a serious change in a business? Wow. Okay. I think we had nearly all hands up. And those of you who didn't raise your hands, trust me, it all starts, particularly in the culture side of things, with a single interaction, how you show up, what you do. So hopefully, in the next 30 to 45 minutes, I'm going to prove to you what importance culture has when it comes to business and commercial success. And I'm going to convince you that each and every single one of you is in a perfect position to begin changing things within your own company and within the wider society as well. So let's launch into it. I promised you that I was going to tell you a little bit about myself before we start so that I can explain what position I'm coming from, who am I, to talk to you about these things. As Stuart mentioned, Granttree, which is a company that I founded 6 years ago now, literally in the second bedroom, is now a company that's turning over close to £3 million, has actually 30 people, we've just recruited a couple, and works with 600 plus clients in the technology space. Those of you who operate in the tech space or are perhaps an engineer or a developer would have heard of people like Stack Exchange or perhaps Go Cardless, a payment system company. Some of those very fast-moving, innovative companies are our clients, and I'm really, really, really proud of that. And I keep being inspired and kicked in the butt by all those people that I meet. But today is not going to be about what we do. I give a lot of grant funding workshops, and if you're interested in that, please come and talk to me afterwards, or my colleague Jason in the stand. We know quite a bit about your potential eligibility for government grants, but today is not about that at all. We're putting that to the side, and today we're talking about who we are, how we do things, and why we do things the way we do them. And hopefully, just hopefully, some of those things will be little nuggets that you might want to take away, since good artists copy and great artists steal. Try to implement in your teams, perhaps discard them if they don't work, but at least it's going to give you some sort of a beginning to think about your culture in a wider way. So, what we're going to do today, so you know what to expect. First of all, I'm going to give you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour about Granttree, how we started, how our thinking about culture has evolved, and that's actually, bits and pieces of it are going to be quite embarrassing, and some of it's going to be quite hilarious, so it's not all magic. There's plenty of embarrassing stuff in there. Then we're going to have a little bit of an interactive time, because I believe that all the best presentations are those that are truly about the audience and not the speaker. So I'm going to give you a tiny bit of time to get to know each other. I'm sure you've already had a chance, but to spend a tiny bit of time talking about things that you like and things that you think you'd like to change in your working environment. Then I'm going to ask the Simon Sinek question, which is why? We are incredibly busy people. There's loads that's being asked of us every single day. Why does it even make sense to think about your culture as something important, something, I think, fundamental to how your business is going to grow, not in the next 1 or 5 years, in the next 20. perhaps at the time when the time comes to pass on your business to another leader, what's going to happen then? And then I'm going to give you 5 ideas, or I'm going to bring up 5 areas where I think it makes sense to begin to implement change, or start looking at implementing change, at least based on our story and our experience so far. Later on, even more embarrassingly, I'm going to show you a picture from 6 years ago. Someone filmed me at a networking event with a very embarrassing tagline, chairwoman. I have no idea what I was chairwoman at that point, perhaps chairwoman of my own visions. I was literally broke, and I just started the business with one other person. So I'm going to tell you what happened since then, and what's the difference. Obviously, I'm still somewhere on the journey, but what's the difference between back then when that photo was taken and where I am right now, and what might be in store for you if you choose to go on somewhat similar journey in terms of growing your company's culture. I'm going to give you some arguments around how culture refers to profitability, to the commercial stuff, to the nitty-gritty stuff, because at that point you might be thinking, right, this is all fun and cool and a very nice thing to do for your staff in terms of growth and everything that you've implemented, but what does it really do in terms of the practicality of running a business? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And if we have time at the end, I'll sum up, perhaps make some recommendations about books that we've learned from along our way. And I'm going to set aside a little bit of time so you can jump in with questions, embarrass me further, ask about some of the interesting things that we've done. Great. Brilliant. So when I talk about Grant Tree, and I've told this story quite a few times, this is just going to be a little shortcut. I like to title that story The Old, the New, and the Scary. Why? When I talk about the old, the new, and the scary, I talk about the people management strategies, about ways of organizing ourselves that we've looked at as a company. And first of all, we've looked at some very old and traditional ways to organize a company. So hierarchical structure, reporting lines, org charts, all that stuff that when you perhaps go to your first business coach, they'll tell you, okay, there might be 3 of you right now or 5 of you, but I see that you've got big growing ambitions over there. Let's draw up an org chart so you know what your organization is going to look like when there's 100 of you. So that's the old. Then there's going to be the new, some stuff that we've implemented that perhaps you've read about in books about Zappos. I've seen that Stuart on his stand has got a book by Tony Hsieh, Delivering Happiness. Zappos is a company sold to Amazon. They've got a very interesting way of relating to each other within their organization. And finally, the scary stuff. So stuff that when you first hear it, you're like, okay, this is a little bit hippie, or it's a little bit out there. For example, team members setting their own salaries, but we'll get there. So let's start with the old. The company was started, as I mentioned, literally in a second bedroom with my then boyfriend, now husband, still together. Our friends were absolutely terrified. They told us that in 3 months' time, we would split up, the business would be finished, and they would know who to be friends with, whether with me or with him. We survived. We started making money quite quickly. In our first year, we got to about £100,000 worth of revenues, which is not bad. Nothing compared to some of our technology clients who can do $1 million and more in the first year, but we were quite proud of that. And in our second year, we employed our first full-time person. Again, I was absolutely terrified. I just thought to myself, I've got all these hard-earned clients that I've hustled after with my blood, sweat, and tears. As Stuart pointed out, yes, I have been called saleswoman from hell, and I can be dangerous. And I thought to myself, if I give all these clients over to somebody else, how can I possibly trust that they'll look after them with that kind of engagement that I had to muster in order to win those clients to begin with. We hired him. He was called Amar. He spent 6 years at UBS. He's taken a massive cut on his salary because he wanted to get involved in the startup world, bless him. And he was with us for 3 years. A fantastic guy who added a lot of value to our business. And then we started employing people. Things started moving along. My fear about being able to give some responsibility away to other people eased off. And at some point, we found ourselves in a place where it felt like we're doing all the right things, but we're kind of pulling in different directions. So we were all in it fully, moving ahead, intelligent people, but really there was nothing uniting us or pulling us on the same page. And that's when we employed our first business coach. And that's when he told us about the old. So all the stuff that you're supposed to have in your business, which is reporting lines, which is how do you motivate people? How do you set up motivation, kind of performance-driven reward system to make sure that people do the stuff that you want them to do and maybe even more. And that's when we set things up, such as we had a little board in our office. Back then, we managed to rent a few desks from one of our bigger clients. They had a big office. They allowed us to rent a few desks. So we had a little corner, perhaps like over there where the flower is. And I remember that board on the wall. And at the beginning of each month, back then we had maybe 6, 7 people. Every one of us would set goals for themselves. So what do I want to achieve? If I achieve those goals, so if I had those 3 ticks for 3 goals, at the end of each month, if I managed to keep that up for a quarter, I would get a pay raise. And we just congratulated ourselves for that, and we just thought, what a fantastic performance-driven reward system. And I remember that one conversation, because we used to have a lot of one-to-ones with people to make sure that we kind of keep on the same page. And I remember this one conversation where an employee called Ellie said to me exactly the following. How do you think I feel when I look at that board and those ticks? And I thought to myself, you feel motivated, hopefully? She said, I feel insulted. And that really got to me. I had no idea where she was coming from. And then she explained. She said, this is not a kindergarten. I've come all the way. She was actually working in Bali before. She was part of an accelerator program. I've come all the way from Bali because I've researched you. I knew what I was signing up for. I decided that I had what it took to take this company a little bit further. And now you're giving me 3 ticks so that I'm supposedly motivated to do the right things. I mean, if I wasn't motivated, I wouldn't have signed up for this to begin with. And that's when we started to think, perhaps there's a bit more to motivation than ticks and pay raises. Perhaps the kind of company we're building is not a kind of company that we left to begin with. Perhaps the kind of company that we're building is the kind of company that we don't want to work for in the first place. And our thinking slowly started to change. We started reading some books out there. I remember talking to a friend of mine who at the time was one of the senior managers in a software company. And geeky companies out there tend to try out all sorts of interesting ways of managing people and managing work. And I asked him this question: how do you manage people in your workplace? How do you make sure that they do what they're supposed to do? And he gave me this answer: we make sure we hire incredibly intelligent people who know what we're about, and we let them get on with it. That shut me up for the rest of the evening. I didn't get it at that point, but during the months afterwards, I started to get on the same page. We decided to get rid of managers. We decided to get rid of reporting lines. We read about companies such as Valve Software who have, you guys are sitting along big tables. They have desks on wheels. And you might choose this lady's project to work on because you think that it's interesting, you can add value. So you take your desk on a wheel, perhaps you take it into a lift that's actually customized to accommodate that desk because they have such lifts. And you take it a level up and you wheel it towards that lady's table. And when you think that that project is no longer of value, you take your desk, you wheel it somewhere else. So we read about self-managing teams, about so-called flat structure. We started to implement, I see you're nodding, so you've seen that kind of thing. We implemented that, and it slowly started to feel like that kind of company where, it's beginning to feel like that kind of company I would want to work for myself. Was it weird and difficult, and did we run into brick walls? Of course we did. But we had the courage to push forward. And then the scary thing came along, because I read this fantastic book, which is called Maverick, by a guy called Ricardo Semler, who, in the 70s of the last century in Brazil, implemented a democratically managed structure within a company that has right now hundreds of thousands of people. And I remember reading that book, and my co-founder was reading it as well. And at some point, we checked in with each other, and he said, "Did you get to the scary bit?" And I'm like, well, all the kind of stuff that they're doing there is really scary, but did you get to the really scary bit? Well, they set their own salaries. And I'm like, so I took my book, and I quickly kind of fast-forwarded to the bit where they set their own salaries. And it was absolutely incredible. In an environment which was very heavily managed and legislated by workers' unions, in the 70s in Brazil, in manufacturing plants, I read about people being able to kind of get together and decide what a given plant is going to do with its own budget and its own resources. And we just thought, if someone was able to do this within such a difficult environment, just like Chantal said, it's all in the mind. If someone is able to do it in that environment, what the hell is stopping us from being able to try in a company like ours? So we did. We implemented a system where anybody, even the most junior person in the company, can make any decision that can change the direction of the business. I'll talk about it later, exactly how it works. It's called the advice process. We implemented a system where anybody can change their own salary using that advice process. And I'll talk about it later as well. We've got a system where people, pretty much from the moment they join, are involved in very important programs for the company, are given responsibility that really outstrips their experience and everything they had been able to learn in their previous jobs. Is it tough? It's really tough, particularly for the leader. And I'm still on a massive growth path. Is it worth it? Oh my God. At this point in my life, it's not my first company, not the last one. I know that I'm no longer interested in running businesses the traditional way. I believe that organizations, small organizations in particular, are a metaphor and a mirror for how we relate to one another in society. And if we want to change the world, if we want to do something drastic and global, look at your team to begin with. If you can do it there, you can do it on a much larger scale as well. but we'll get there. Cool. I should have pulled that up, obviously, earlier on. This is not for everyone. We have a very tight interview process where we make sure that people know what they're up for. They know what will be expected of them. They know they'll be continuously pushed out of their comfort zone. They'll be asked to handle conflicts. They'll be asked to step into situations that are very scary and uncomfortable. And we do our best to make sure that people who join us are happy with that. And they're at that stage of their self-awareness in their life where they just simply want to do that for themselves. Anyways, yeah, that's my team on our rooftop terrace in Clerkenwell in London. If you want to join one of our yoga classes, there are 12 midday on Wednesday. So if you find yourself on a Wednesday afternoon, a Wednesday midday in London, give me a shout. And there's a lovely lady there who comes in with mats and does a yoga class for us. Now, as I mentioned before, I really believe in those kinds of presentations where you guys have an opportunity to reflect a little bit. And sometimes those are, at least according to my experience, the most valuable times in a day packed full with content like this one. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to team up with one person on your table, ideally someone that you're not working with. It's just going to be easier for the purpose of this exercise. And we're going to talk to each other a little bit about where we work and how it feels. So if I give you a second now to find that one person that you're going to spend the next 2, 4, 6, 8 minutes talking to, please do that now, and I'll give you instructions in a moment. Thank you so much. Whatever problems you've touched on, I'd like to think that this is what it starts from, the awareness, being able to admit it, to frame it. So well done to all of you who've managed to touch the nerve, touch on something really quite difficult, quite important. I know from Stuart that we don't have a hell of a lot of time remaining, so I'm going to make sure that we get to the main part of the presentation, which is to actually tell you why it's important to change and what are some of the ideas that I have based on our experience around implementing change in your organizational culture. Why change? Well, this is quite an interesting quote. In an ordinary organization, most people spend time and invest a lot of their time and energy into hiding their weaknesses, hiding their mistakes. And now, if we could make sure that that time is actually invested into doing awesome work, removing the so-called bullshit and doing awesome work, growth, organizational development, just imagine how much more your organization could be effective in the marketplace. Secondly, a lot has been said today about internal income, so and about the other type of motivations that people have besides salary when they join a company. This is particularly true of the younger generations, or millennials. A lot of those people work in my company. What they're looking for is a place that they can grow, a place where they can bring their talent and really flourish, uncover themselves. And if you create that kind of company, you're going to recruit leaders, not just leaders that can run companies, but leaders that can reconstitute and pivot organizations. And those are the kinds of leaders that you need. If you're already thinking ahead in terms of when I retire, when I step away to do something else, who am I going to be able to pass my company on to? And thirdly, if you do this change with only those motivations in place, it's probably not going to come from the right place. It's probably not going to be wholesome for you to really embrace the change and for people to believe in it. So where I'm coming from, and I mentioned that already, is that if we're able to bring about such a change in our small organizations, that really becomes something that can influence people and organizations globally. As the current political spectrum, even US, up-and-coming US elections show us, there's a lot of people out there who are driven by fear, by anger, people that are very easy to manipulate. And that's something that really, really saddens me. And I feel that we as leaders have the power to show people a different path to self-awareness, where suddenly they're coming from an entirely different place in their work, in terms of seeking meaning, in terms of growth. Great. And now the first thing that I'd like to focus on in terms of how to bring about a change into your own organization is to increase the level of humanity in your company. And what I mean by that, it's all about making it okay to be a human being with all that difficult, nasty, not well-rounded stuff that comes into it. One of the ways in which we do it is through the so-called check-in protocol. So very often when we sit down around the table for a meeting, and this may sound a little bit weird, and it used to be a bit weird for us, but isn't weird anymore, we would sit down and say, today, I'm feeling a bit anxious. I've got a talk coming up. I'm prepared, but I don't know whether I can really add value, for example, whether I can really shift things for the people that I'll be talking to. So I've got this anxiety. I'm in. And people would say, welcome. It's all about bringing the emotions that you're already coming up with. There are things that are going on for you into the meeting and acknowledging them. And I might say, if that anxiety shows in a meeting, apologies. That's where I'm coming from. That's what's happening for me right at this moment. And it gives me a space and everybody a space around the table to acknowledge, okay, I'm a human being. I've got these things going on for me. And interestingly, the moment you acknowledge those feelings, it's so much easier to get on with it. Second, we look at both recruitment and firing as a blueprint for how you treat people in general. So I'll give you a few examples around what we do in recruitment. With our interviews, we make sure that the experience in itself, it's of value to people. If somebody comes to us and is not chosen, we take a lot of time to give them feedback. We take that as a responsibility to help them further their career. And by the way, we do the same on the way out. If someone's obviously taking a lot of initiative and has come to the company with great energy, then we make sure that at the point where they leave, we actually steer them further along in their career. Some questions that we ask. We dive really, really deep into people's values. So we'd ask, for example, tell me about the last time that you were in a long-term conflict with someone at work. Really, really interesting stuff comes up. A lot of people will tell you, that person was really making life difficult for me, or they were above me, I couldn't do anything. We look for things such as, is that person actually able to look at that conflict from the other perspective? How are they relating to that conflict? That tells us quite a lot about their values and how they're going to react in conflicts that are inevitably going to come up when they work with us. Conflicts come up every day. It's just about whether you are courageous enough to actually relate to them, to talk about them, to bring them up, or whether you kind of try to push it to the side and pretend it doesn't happen. I mentioned Zappos. Zappos have a principle about hiring people that are awesome but humble. That's something that's very close to our heart as well. We prefer to hire someone who is yet to grow in terms of their capability, but has values that are very, very much aligned with where we stand as a company. Allow your team to hold the entirety of the business. What do I mean by that? When people join from day one, they have full access to all of our accounts. It may sound a little bit scary to some of you, but they have access to all the business information that we already have. On the basis of that, they're able to make decisions using the advice process. Advice process allows anyone to suggest any improvement or change. They need to take full responsibility for it, and they need to make sure that they've sought advice from everybody who's got relevant experience or information about that. So, for example, if I want to hire a company coach for the price of £5,000, I would go speak to people like our finance director, like people that I think are going to benefit from that coach, that I'm going to write an all-company email saying, this is why I feel this will be of benefit to the company. I'll make sure that I'll give people time to come and talk to me. And inevitably, some of them are going to say, this is a great idea. And some of them are going to say, well, how is that going to add to the bottom line? And then I make a decision that I announce saying, thank you, I announce where I basically tell people what I've heard and what conclusion I've reached. And then if somebody disagrees with me, then we might have a conflict resolution process later on where I present the arguments that have gotten to me from both sides and why I made the decision that I made. I see from Stuart that we have not that not that much time left, so I'm going to whiz through the three other things that I've come up with here. So we look at a company as an incubator for people's capabilities. So we help people to coach each other. We've got teams set up where people learn how to contribute to each other's growth, and that really kind of shows up in terms of how they then relate to their own growth. We have a company coach that is present in some of those meetings and helps people to kind of navigate their growth and navigate their career path even beyond their time at Grantry. There's something really interesting around frankness score. So a lot of people would make sure that they don't talk to each other about the difficult stuff, about if I'm perhaps friends with you or we work really well together, we might have a kind of implicit agreement that if I make a mistake, we're not really going to point that out because kind of we like each other, we like to go for a drink after work, and kind of I have your back, you have my back. What we've been really working on, and I've seen some results of it, is that even if people relate really well to each other, they're still able to put that relationship aside and at work, in a very kind of wholesome, humble way, they are able to kind of point mistakes to each other and talk about their growth areas and opportunities to each other. And finally, very important point for me is diversity. And by that, I don't mean just recruiting more women, although that's very important, particularly in the tech sector. I'm always for a lookout for interesting women from the STEM subjects who might be a good fit for my team. But it means recruiting people with a different perspective, perhaps from the outside of your industry, recruiting people from slightly different culture, that what you're suited to, people with slightly different arguments, people from different age groups, and to make sure that we are able to do that. We have remote working programs. We've got currently one person working from Taiwan for us. We have a full-time dad who dials in for most of the meetings. So we've got all sorts of facilities just to make sure that those people are included and can work just as effectively as anybody else. This is a picture of me from 6 years ago. Back then, I was someone who really struggled to talk about my vulnerabilities. These days, I'm able to talk to people on my team about depression, about anxiety that I suffer from. And because of that, I'm able to create space for them to not always be their best selves at work. Today, my mindset, I'd like to think, is much closer to abundance mindset than scarcity mindset. And if you'd like to find out more how that journey has changed me, please come and talk to me. Finally, at Grantry, we work mostly with tech companies or people that have implemented some sort of technology in their companies, and we're able to either find a particular government grant that they qualify for, or help them with a scheme called R&D tax credits that allows you to get a proportion of your research and development costs back into the company. If that's something that could be relevant to you. Am I interested in your business? I absolutely am, as long as that's relevant, that it could be valuable. We have a little stand here, and I'd really, really appreciate that. Either any questions to do with culture and how we work, or questions around our knowledge to do with government funding. Thank you very, very much for your time and attention.